The brightest star in Frasier was carrying one of the most devastating family tragedies in Hollywood history. His father was murdered. His sister was assaulted and then died at 18. His mother and 2 other siblings were also lost in an accident. After that came alcohol, cocaine, multiple DUIs, and drug possession. But Frasier did not just have one person carrying that kind of pain. Other faces in the cast were carrying breakups, tragedy, illness loss, and dark corners the audience never saw behind the laughter, the polish, and the success this show brought. So in this video, let's take a hard look at where their lives really went after the glow of Frasier. Yeah, we're going to pull back the curtain on each one, from the most painful downward spirals to the tragedies people just cannot forget. And trust me, there are some stories here you ought to brace yourself for before you hear them. Number 1, Kelsey Grammer as Dr. Frasier Crane. Kelsey Grammer was the kind of face American men from a certain era could look at and instantly know they were watching real prime-time television. Sharp suit, way too much confidence, and always convinced he was the smartest guy in the room. That was Frasier Crane. When Frasier premiered in 1993, Grammer was 38, and he had already been carrying this character over from Cheers for almost 10 years. By then, it was not some acting challenge anymore. It was already his name. After Frasier, he became one of the most durable sitcom faces in American television. He won multiple Emmys for that role, and years later, he still came back to Frasier in The Revival. But Kelsey Grammer's life off-screen was a whole lot heavier
like a
than
child
that polished image.
whose hope had died.
His father was murdered when he was still a child. In 1975, his sister Karen was kidnapped, raped, and also died at just 18. Then later, his 2 half-brothers died in a scuba diving accident too. Just that alone would have crushed a whole lot of people. And all that tragedy brought anger, shame, and a long stretch of self-destruction through alcohol and cocaine. In the late 1980s and early 90s, right when his career was taking off hard, Grammer kept getting into legal trouble for drunk driving and cocaine possession. He was arrested, put on probation, sent to treatment, and later had to go to Betty Ford for rehab. What made it even heavier was that those wounds did not disappear once he became successful. In 2025, Grammer published the book Karen, a Brother Remembers, where he wrote directly about his sister's death. That same year, he also admitted he had not fully shown up as a father for his 2 oldest children and was trying to repair that. This year, Kelsey Grammer is 71. He is still tied to Frasier, but if you really look closely, what makes him unforgettable is not just the intelligence, the humor, or the classy feel of Frasier Crane. It is the fact that he lived through a life full of grief addiction and mistakes and still somehow managed to keep standing in front of the public. Number 2, David Hyde Pierce as Dr. Niles Crane. David Hyde Pierce was the one who turned Niles Crane into one of the most memorable comic roles on Frasier. Niles is Frasier's younger brother, a psychiatrist who is perfectionistic, obsessed with control, and so polite, it becomes funny. Pierce was born in 1959. When Frasier premiered in 1993, he was 34. Over the course of 11 seasons, he got 11 Emmy nominations for the role and won 4 times. After Frasier, he did not dive into mainstream television. He shifted his focus to the stage, kept working steadily, and won a Tony. That was a very clear direction for David Hyde Pierce after the series ended less visible on television, but still holding a very high place in the theater world. His personal life never had any big scandals. The most notable thing was how private he stayed for many years. Pierce had been with Brian Hargrove since 1982. The two lived together for decades before getting married on October 24, 2008, just days before Proposition 8 took effect in California. Later on, he became a little more open about that relationship. The heaviest part of his life has been Alzheimer's. His father had it, his grandfather had it too. For years, Pierce has stayed involved in awareness work and community support related to Alzheimer's, including Caring Kind. When Frasier got revived, he chose not to come back. He said very clearly that the new series did not really need Niles, and he himself had never truly wanted to return just to repeat the past. That decision matters a lot when you look at the path he took after Frasier. He did not live by clinging to the role that made him famous, even though it was the most famous role of his life. This year, David Hyde Pierce is 67. He is still doing theater, still has his long marriage with Brian Hargrove, and still remains a part of Frasier fans' memories that cannot be separated from the show. Number 3, John Mahoney as Martin Crane. Martin is the father of Frasier, a former Seattle cop who had to retire after being shot, and then moved in with his son. When Frasier premiered in 1993, Mahoney was 53. He appeared in 263 episodes, basically the entire series. John Mahoney was born in 1940 in Blackpool and grew up in Manchester. He moved to America in the late 1950s under the sponsorship of his sister, joined the military to speed up his citizenship process, then kept studying before settling into steady work. He did not become famous young. He did not fully leave his editing job to pursue acting until age 37, when he joined Steppenwolf in Chicago. After that, he won a Tony for The House of Blue Leaves and only then entered the phase where mainstream audiences really came to know him. Mahoney's personal life was extremely private. He never married. He once said he understood why marriage was a step he never took. His early years in America were heavy too. He talked about homesickness being so bad when he first came over that at times it made him think about suicide. In the final years of his life, he developed throat cancer. John Mahoney died on February 4th, 2018 at 77. For mainstream audiences, Martin Crane remains the role of his lifetime. Number 4, Jane Leeves as Daphne Moon. Jane Leeves is the face tied to Daphne Moon, the physical therapist who lives in Martin Crane's house and becomes the central romantic storyline of Frasier through her relationship with Niles. Jane Leeves was born in 1961. When Frasier premiered in 1993, she was 32. This was the role that turned her into a familiar name with American audiences after years of only smaller parts and supporting roles on television. Before Frasier, Jane Leeves came up through dance. She had appeared on The Benny Hill Show, showed up in David Lee Roth's California Girls music video, and only gradually found a place in America through Throb Murphy Brown and Seinfeld. The most notable public part of her life was not scandal, but the fact that her career path was a pretty long one before she truly broke through. HarperCollins even described her as a former ballerina who came from a very ordinary background in England before Frasier completely changed her life. Jane Leeves' personal life has been pretty steady. She married Marshall Coben and has 2 children. One detail Frasier fans love is that Peri Gilpin is her real-life best friend and neighbor. Peri was even in the delivery room when Jane gave birth to her first child. After Frasier, she kept going with another big role on Hot in Cleveland from 2010 to 2015. This year, Jane Leeves is 65, and the most notable new development is the memoir Daphne Moon Remembers, released in 2026 and focused on the years she spent tied to Frasier. Number 5, Peri Gilpin as Roz Doyle. Peri Gilpin was the one who made Roz Doyle one of the sharpest roles on Frasier. Roz is the producer of Frasier's radio show at KACL there from the beginning to the end of the series, and the character who keeps the whole group grounded in everyday life. Peri Gilpin was born in 1961. When Frasier premiered in 1993, she was 32. This year, Peri Gilpin is 65. The role came to her after a major casting switch. Lisa Kudrow had originally been chosen, but Peri Gilpin was the one who kept the role when filming started. Years later, she also came back for the revival, and by season 2, Roz had been promoted to a recurring role. In 1983, when she was just 22, her biological father, Jim O'Brien, died in a skydiving accident. In Philadelphia, he was not some unknown figure. He was a major face at WPF. I had done news and weather and was a familiar presence on local television. He died at just 43. The next tragedy came in 1997. Her mother died of leiomyosarcoma, a rare form of cancer. From the time her mother was diagnosed, Peri Gilpin started taking part in cancer research awareness efforts. But illness kept hitting her family. On April 30th, 2020, her sister Patty died after a long fight with cancer. On July 29, 2023, her brother Mark Gilpin, a former child actor who had appeared in Jaws 2, died from complications related to a glioblastoma brain tumor at 56. Looking at the timeline, straight through, Peri Gilpin lost her father, then her mother, then her sister, then her brother. In the middle of all that loss, she still managed to keep a steady private life. Peri Gilpin married painter Christian Vincent in 1999. Her twin daughters were born through surrogacy on May 7, 2004, right as the original Frasier was ending. In 2024, she said becoming the mother of twin girls changed her life completely and at times left her overwhelmed. Number 6, Dan Butler as Bob Bulldog Briscoe. Dan Butler is the actor who played Bulldog Briscoe, the loudest sports host at KACL. When Frasier premiered in 1993, he was 39. This year he is 71. Butler was born in 1954 in Indiana and had already done theater and television before that, but Frasier was the role that really made audiences remember his face. Bulldog started out recurring then. Butler was moved up to main cast for seasons 4 through 6 before returning again in later seasons. The most important part of Dan Butler's story happened off-screen. In 1994, he wrote and performed the solo play, The Only Thing Worse You Could Have Told Me. That title came from his father's reaction when Butler came out. That is the single most important public detail in his private life, because it shows this was not some gentle announcement. It was a real collision inside the family. That play also made Butler one of the earlier openly gay male television actors in the middle of the 1990s. After that, he did not stop at simply being open about who he was. In 1995, Butler served as the spokesperson for Human Rights Campaign's National Coming Out Day. He also worked with ACT OP and spent around 6 years working with the Trevor Crisis Line and the Suicide Prevention Center in Los Angeles. That is the part of his story that makes his real-life profile feel nothing like Bulldog on the show. Butler's most famous role was this hyper-masculine, crude guy. In real life, he spent years tied to LGBT advocacy and suicide prevention work for young people. Dan Butler married producer Richard Waterhouse and kept working in both theater and television. In 2024, he even came back as Bulldog in Season 2 of the Frasier revival. Number 7. Bebe Neuwirth as Dr. Lilith Sternin. Bebe Neuwirth is the face tied to Lilith Sternin, Frasier's ex-wife, and Frederick's mother. On Frasier, she did not appear as often as Roz or Daphne, but every time she came back, it carried weight because Lilith pulled Frasier's past straight from Cheers into this series. Bebe Neuwirth was born in 1958. When Frasier premiered in 1993, she was 35. Her career profile was strong. Right from the beginning, she studied at Juilliard, came up through dance, and the stage then won 2 Emmys for Lilith and 2 Tonys on Broadway. The most notable thing in Bebe Neuwirth's story is not scandal, but the physical price her body had to pay for years of performing. She was a real dancer before she ever became a television star. By the middle of the 2000s, after years of physical therapy, arthroscopic surgery, ongoing pain, and pressure from not being able to dance the way she used to, she had to get a hip replacement. That experience is exactly what led her to help build the Dancer's Resource, a program that supports dancers dealing with injury, financial crisis, and career hardship. For Bebe Neuwirth, this was the biggest public life event because it hit the very tool her life depended on her body. Her private life has stayed pretty quiet. She married Paul Dorman in 1984 and divorced in 1991. In 2009, she married Chris Calkins. After Cheers and Frasier, she leaned much more toward Broadway than television, kept working steadily, and still returned as Lilith in the revival in 2023. This year, Bebe Neuwirth is 68. The thing that has kept her name strong for decades is very clear television gave her fame, but the stage is where she gave most of her life. Number 8, Harriet Sansom. Harris is Bebe Glazer. Harriet Sansom Harris is the actress who played Bebe Glazer, Frasier's manager. This is not a role that shows up all the time, but it is still one of the sharpest supporting roles in the series. Harriet was born in 1955 in Fort Worth, Texas. When Frasier premiered in 1993, she was 38. She entered Juilliard at 17, graduated, then joined the acting company touring in classical theater for 3 years before building a place for herself on screen. Frasier helped mainstream audiences remember her face, but Harriet's real foundation was always the stage. Harriet Sansom. Harris lost her father when she was just 7. Before that, she thought she might go into law or politics like him. After his death, that path closed. As a child, she was also pretty shy, and her family got her into theater as a way to pull her out of that shell. Looking at the public record, this is the clearest private turning point in her life, losing her father young, then going into theater very early and fully following that road. After Frasier, Harriet did not blow up like some tabloid star. She just kept working and working well. In 2002, she won a Tony for Thoroughly Modern Millie. It was not until 2022, after decades in the profession, that she got her first Emmy nomination for Hacks. In 2024, she returned as Bebe Glazer in Season 2 of the Frasier revival. This year, Harriet Sansom Harris is 71. For her, the story that sticks is not scandal, but a very long career built on real training, strong stage work, and recognition that came pretty late, but felt completely earned. Number 9, Edward Hibbert as Gil Chesterton. Edward Hibbert is the man who played Gil Chesterton, KACL's food critic. On Frasier, this was one of those recurring roles people remembered right away, the fussy, sharp-tongued gentleman who always made the radio station feel a little more cutting whenever he walked in. Hibbert was born in 1955 on Long Island, grew up in England, is the son of actor Geoffrey Hibbert, studied at RADA, and started acting professionally in the late 1970s. When Frasier premiered in 1993, he was 38. Before American audiences remembered him as Gil Hibbert, already had a pretty solid stage background, and won an Obie Award in 1993 for Geoffrey. On top of acting, he also worked for many years as a literary agent, which is a pretty unusual path for a television actor. Edward Hibbert's public personal life does not come with the usual tabloid trail of scandals. He has been open about being gay, and once said he never really had one formal coming-out moment with his family, because in the England he came from, it was more like nobody said it out loud, but everybody knew. In 2014, he also said being gay in Hollywood was never a major issue for him. So the private side of Hibbert's life has stayed pretty quiet, and if you look at the public record, the biggest trouble tied to his name did not come from romance. It came from his work outside acting. In 2018, the embezzlement scandal involving more than $3.4 million at the Donadio and Olson agency pulled Hibbert's name into one of the publishing world's biggest collapses. Publishers Weekly reported that Darren Webb, the agency's bookkeeper, apologized to his former employers, Neil Olson and Edward Hibbert. Court records also showed the whole thing forced the agency to shut down and go bankrupt. And Hibbert wrote in his victim impact statement that he suffered chronic insomnia, panic attacks, and acute anxiety about his financial future. In 2024, he returned as Gil in Season 2 of the Frasier revival. Number 10, Patrick Kerr as Noel Shempsky. Patrick Kerr is the actor who played Noel Shempsky, the KACL technician who loves Star Trek, speaks Klingon, and keeps hovering around Roz Doyle like his whole life got stuck in that hallway. Noel was never a major role, but he was one of those supporting faces Frasier fans could recognize instantly. Patrick Kerr was born on January 23, 1956, in Wilmington, Delaware. When Frasier first aired in 1993, he was 37. He has an MFA from the Yale School of Drama, and that tells you a lot about the kind of road he chose stage first television later. Patrick Kerr never really followed the path of a sitcom actor who gets one role, rides it, and disappears. He is the kind of actor who has just kept working for a very long time, very steadily. On stage, he appeared on Broadway in Travesti's The Ritz and You Can't Take It With You. Off-Broadway, he did Geoffrey and stage Kiss. On television besides Frasier, he also moved through Seinfeld, Friends, Will and Grace, E.R. Law, and Order Third Rock from the Sun, and then had a recurring part on Curb Your Enthusiasm. When you look at that record, it tells you right away this is somebody who has been in the game for decades, never loud about it but never out of it either. Patrick Kerr is also not the kind of actor who drags his private life into the flashbulbs. People do not remember him for scandal, messy divorces, or shocking falls. They remember him because he keeps showing up in this sitcom or that stage play, always doing the job, always getting the role right. By 2024, he was still appearing in Season 2 of The Big Door Prize. This year, Patrick Kerr is 70. For an actor like that, the most interesting thing is not scandal. It is a career path that has lasted more than 40 years without ever really breaking. Number 11. Tom McGowan as Kenny Daly. Tom McGowan is the actor who played Kenny Daly, the manager of KACL, in the later stretch of Frasier. Kenny is not the kind of character who dominates the screen, but audiences remember him because he represents the most everyday part of that radio station, a long-time working guy who is likable, a little rumpled, and always stuck dealing with one internal mess after another. Tom McGowan was born on July 26, 1959 in Belmar, New Jersey. When Frasier first aired in 1993, he was 34. He had very formal training, studied at Hofstra, then earned his MFA from the Yale School of Drama in 1988. Before television audiences remembered him as Kenny Daly, Tom McGowan already had a very strong stage foundation. Right out of the gate, with his Broadway debut in La Bête in 1991, he got Tony and Drama Desk nominations. Later on, he also won an Obie for the food chain in 1996. When you look at McGowan's career, it is very clear he did not build it through noise. He built it through training stage work and only then gradually moved into film and sitcoms. Besides Frasier, he also showed up in Everybody Loves, Raymond ER, Desperate Housewives, Veep: The Good Fight, and familiar films like Sleepless in Seattle, The Birdcage: As Good as It Gets, and Bad Santa. Tom McGowan's private life has been pretty steady. He married Kathy and has 2 children. Mark, born in 1992, and Mary, born in 1995. There has never been any major scandal hanging over his name. The most notable thing about McGowan sits somewhere else. He is one of those actors who has worked for a very long time, moving from Broadway to sitcoms and then back to the stage again. From 2009 on, he stayed closely tied to the role of the Wizard in Wicked, and in recent years, he has kept performing on major stages. This year, Tom McGowan is 67. Number 12. Marsha Mason as Sherry Dempsey. When Marsha Mason came into Frasier as Sherry Dempsey, she was not an actress looking for one last late career shot. She had already been a film star from an earlier generation for a long time. 4 Oscar nominations, 2 Golden Globe wins, and a place in some of the brightest years Hollywood had in the 1970s. On Frasier, she appeared in only 6 episodes as Martin Crane's girlfriend, but that was still enough to bring her an Emmy nomination. Marsha Mason was born in 1942 in St. Louis. When she started playing Sherry in 1997, she was 55. The heavy part of Marsha Mason's private life is that it explains almost her entire career path. In 2002, she herself said both her parents drank too much, and growing up as the child of alcoholics shaped her whole life. She said that in uncertain situations, she always had a tendency to go looking for someone to protect her, someone to lead the way. That detail matters because it connects directly to the most famous marriage of her life. In 1973, Marsha Mason married Neil Simon. That marriage lasted 10 years and was tied closely to the height of her fame. But later, she said very clearly that Simon did not really want her working far from him. So, for the most part, they only worked on projects that kept them together. After the divorce in 1983, she no longer really knew what she wanted to do. Stayed in Los Angeles for a while, trying to hold on, but felt like Hollywood was getting younger and younger while she was getting older in the eyes of that system. In the end, she stepped completely out of that world, moved to a farm in New Mexico, grew organic herbs, created her own product line, and spent years living outside the Hollywood machine. It was not until 2014 that she sold the farm, returned to the East Coast, and became much more active again in both theater and television. This year, Marsha Mason is 84, and in March 2026, she was still directing at Arizona Theater Company. Number 13, Millicent Martin as Gertrude Moon. Millicent Martin came into Frasier long after she had already become a veteran face of British television and theater. She was born in 1934 in Romford, Essex. When Frasier first aired in 1993, she was 59. Before American audiences remembered her as Gertrude Moon Millicent, Martin had already been well known since the early 1960s through That Was the Week. That was won a BAFTA TV award in 1964 and then moved through British film, the West End, and Broadway with 2 Tony nominations. In other words, Frasier did not make her name. It was just one later stop in a career that was already very long. On Frasier, she played Gertrude Moon, Daphne's mother, showing up in recurring appearances in the later seasons and becoming a very clear part of the Moon family storyline. But if you look at her public-private life, the more interesting part sits outside this sitcom. Millicent Martin married singer Ronnie Carroll in 1958, then divorced. After that, she married actor Norman Eshley, and that marriage ended too. It was not until 1978 that she found a more lasting marriage with Mark Alexander, the American husband, tied to the stretch of her life when she settled for good in the United States. Those 2 broken marriages were not chased by tabloids the way other stars were, but they still show that her private life went through plenty of change before it finally steadied. What is really impressive about Millicent Martin is how long she has stayed in the profession. After Frasier, she kept working, and then picked up another long recurring role on Grace and Frankie from 2017 to 2022. This year, Millicent Martin is 92. Number 14, Wendie Malick as Roni Lawrence. Now we get to the last name on today's list. Wendie Malick came to Frasier pretty late, when she stepped into the role of Roni Lawrence in season 11. In 2003, she was already 53 and had long been a familiar face on American television from Dream On and Just Shoot Me. On Frasier, Roni appeared in only 10 episodes, but she held a very clear place, the last woman to enter Martin Crane's life and marry him in the series finale. Wendie Malick was born in 1950 in Buffalo, New York. She studied theater at Ohio Wesleyan, but her first path actually ran through modeling. After that, she left that world behind to move into acting, then built her name through sitcoms and long-running television. When you look at her career, it is very clear she was not the kind of person who rose too early and burned out fast. She took a longer route, then became a truly solid television presence. Wendie Malick's private life has not been loud, but it has not been completely flat either. She married writer Mitch Glazer in 1982, then divorced in 1989. 6 years later, she married Richard Erickson. Since then, her private life has been much quieter and much more stable. The 2 of them have lived for years in Topanga in the Santa Monica Mountains. Biographical sources also note that she follows a pescatarian diet and has openly supported Democratic Party organizations, candidates, and political causes. With Wendie Malick, the public side of her private life is not about scandal. It is about a very deliberate way of living and a pretty clear sense of where she stands. After Frasier, she did not slow down. Hot in Cleveland gave her another standout stretch lasting 128 episodes. Then after that came BoJack Horseman, Shrinking Night Court, and The Chicken Sisters. This year, Wendie Malick is 76. With her, the most notable thing is not one shocking private life event, but the fact that she went through a broken marriage, rebuilt her life, and has kept working with real staying power all the way to this age. Looking back at the Frasier cast after more than 3 decades, what stays with you is not just who changed and how. What really stays with you is how time moved through these people in such different ways. Some carried the glow through their whole careers. Some went through loss, illness, heartbreak, and still quietly stayed standing. And then there are faces who only had to show up once to bring us right back to a time when American television still had its own special kind of charm. What about you? Who do you remember most from the Frasier cast? Which character makes you feel the most nostalgic and whose real-life story surprised you the most? Tell me your memories down in the comments. And if you also love the movies, the sitcoms, and the faces that made that golden era what it was, subscribe to the channel so we can meet again on the next list.